Okay, so in this video, I decided to take a step back from the back-end development work and give some time to sort of clean up the front-end interface of the application, of the bookkeeper application. So let me just start it here. And since this won't involve much intensive back-end coding work, I decided to spend some time doing this while playing one of my current favorite games, EVE Online. And it's just sort of a way to sort of relax. So I have a ship here, and I'm not really just a segue, right? So I'm not really a gamer, so to speak, but this particular game, which is only available for Windows and I think Mac OS 10, is I guess one of the games that runs pretty well on Linux, considering I'm just running this on an integrated Intel graphics card that also feeds my sci-fi itch. So the reason why I can play this game while doing some code, for example, is that it's boring enough. Well, at least some aspects of the game is boring enough that I can do it side by side while coding. So an example here, just to show, is mining. Right, so I can probably try to mine this condensed cordite. I'm not really invested into the game so much as setting like some very, very small goals that I can do side by side with work. For example, for this particular timeline, or for this particular time, I'd like to have my ISK, which is the in-game currency, reach 20 million. Right, so let's just set up this mining thing before I start coding. Okay, so I'd like to mine this particular asteroid. Okay, target there, and start my miners. Okay, so while that's working, I can now switch to the actual code and focus on the project. Okay. By the way, the EVE Online is currently running on Steam Linux using the Proton sort of compatibility layer, which works well on some older games, allows you to run Windows games on Linux. Okay, so enough about that. Okay, so here's my current interface. It doesn't look interesting. So usually when I do user interfaces for my system, I just usually adapt a pre-existing one, since most of the applications I do for work are business utility applications, automation of business processes, using some sort of database-driven application. So my go-to interface for that is this thing called Core UI, which is a free Bootstrap-based administration template, which is pretty useful. It has almost all the elements I need to create a simple but usable interface that I can easily extend for my own needs. So, but for the learning process itself, I have no idea how most of the advanced user interfaces work for this particular template. So I like to take the time in order to invest into some learning and learn some new UI skills, so some new HTML, CSS skills that I'll try to do in the form of a tutorial. So I'll be following this tutorial and see if I can implement this sidebar, which is I think common in most of my applications, which kind of works something like this in Core UI. Okay, so just to show, so at the default. Okay, so like most of the applications we see these days that are utility applications, not basic websites, is that they have this sort of sidebar here, which allows you to extend with different menu items, which is very, very useful for web-based systems, right? So I have no idea how this was built by Core UI, so I'd like to go through this tutorial to try to learn it. Alright, so let's see what we can do here. Okay, so starting off with wrapping the main application, I guess. So the tutorial suggests that we have some sort of main div, and we have the sidebar and the actual content. Now, if I were to integrate this in the Rails application, that would often fall under the layouts file for the application, which is this one right here. Okay, so you have your typical body, and I have a navigation here, which is this top navigation here. So I guess I'll use that as my sidebar. I'll have the sidebar as the main navigation, but we have to wrap everything under a parent div, which following the tutorial will just be called wrapper. So this would be the sidebar, and this would be the actual content. So let's just wrap the content under its own respective div. Okay, give it an ID for content, and I'm guessing we might style this later on. And for the navigation, we'll have this in its own div called sidebar. In this case, nav, and give the nav tag an ID called sidebar. Okay, so nothing special yet. We're just defining the different, I guess, elements of the main layout. And let's see what the tutorial says. So we'll wrap everything in the wrapper box to take advantage of CSS flex property. In this case, we'll give the wrapper the CSS property align items stretch. By doing this, the sidebar will take the height of the page content. As the content increases, sidebar height dynamically increases. Okay, so I guess for the flex property, for the CSS property align items, everything within wrapper will follow the sort of global height for both, whatever the global height is for wrapper. So in this case, its child elements sidebar and content will have the same height as whatever wrapper is. Okay, which in this case will take the height of the page content. Okay, so no CSS code yet. Okay, so the next section, sidebar menu is its content. So it's just filling up some content in the sidebar, and within the sidebar it has some sidebar header. I guess we'll style a section where you can put in probably a logo or some link back to the main page, as well as your typical unsorted list with, I guess, the main navigation. So if you were to implement that, probably have another section here that would correspond to sort of the logo, which we'll call sidebar header. Okay, put in some h3 here and say bookkeeper. Right, so of course no CSS yet. If you try to render it, it just looks something like this. Okay, so we have a bunch of classes here. Maybe I won't go through all of them first. Okay, it's just for styling later on. I guess my objective is to just get this sidebar toggle working. Okay, making dropdowns work. To make dropdown menu collapsible, data toggle collapse should be added to link holding the dropdown. Note that I also added a class dropdown toggle. This class adds a little triangle on the side and helps users understand that it's a function. Okay, so I guess it's just a sort of call to action, okay, to switch or to provide an interface to show if the menu is collapsing or not collapsing. Sidebar toggle button. Okay, I'm not interested in that yet. Okay, what I'm more interested in is, I guess, this wrapper. Okay, the CSS part, which has the flexbox attribute here and align items stretch. Okay, so let's start with that. And let's put it first in the top level part, or the top CSS, the application.scss, which is included in all pages in our Rails application. So designing wrapper, display flex with 100%, align items stretch. Okay, so let's see. So I don't think it will put this stuff side by side yet. Oh, okay. Okay, so we now have a side by side div section, I guess, right? Okay, so I guess these attributes. Okay, so the table is not flexing by default. Wonder how we can change that. Okay, so maybe I guess we have to wrap our main, since we're using Bootstrap, I guess we have to wrap our main sort of div given by this one under your typical Bootstrap container definitions. Okay, so let's try that. Okay, let's use container fluid. Okay, so everything inside that will follow the container fluid definition right there. Okay. Okay, so I have some sort of undefined reference. Index is not defined. Okay, so this is a bug here. I might try to resolve it later on. Okay, it's strange to me that the table is not flexing 100%. Okay, let's try to solve that later on as well. Alright, so we got the wrapper CSS defined there. Okay, we'll use this class later on, the JavaScript part. Okay. Okay, so I guess the open close part happens when we have the following CSS definitions. Okay. So for the sidebar, we can give it a minimum width of 250 pixels and a maximum width of 250 pixels. Okay, so we actually have a fixed width for this one. Let's see how it looks like. And then we have a sidebar.active. So if we attach the active class to the sidebar, we simply say margin left negative 250 pixels, which in turn closes the, I'm guessing, closes the sidebar. It has that effect of pushing the sidebar to the left, thus removing it from screen. So let's say sidebar.active margin left . So I'm guessing once we achieve this sort of collapsible thing, just the minimum functionality, I can go ahead and take a look back at my mining ship back in EVE Online. Okay, so we have that, and it's starting to look like a sidebar already. Okay, what else does the tutorial say? So as we do not know if the content will vertically fill the entire screen, we set the minimum height of the sidebar to 100 VH. VH here, keep forgetting what VH means in CSS speak. Right, so it's a measurement of units. We're in It's a relative measurement relative to 1% of the height of the viewport. Okay, so VH here refers to height. So if we say that we have 100 VH, so the height will always be, the minimum height in this case, will always be the maximum height of the current viewport. So it always fixes the sidebar to have a maximum height, or rather to have the height adapt the height of the actual viewport or the browser port. I just invented that browser port thing. Right, so by default, the sidebar has a height of 250, roughly 250 or 244. So if we apply min height, and I think I should also note that the content itself will also have a height of 244. So if we say that the sidebar has a min height of 100 VH, it will fill in the entire port. And since we're having display flex and align item stretch, I guess even the content should have the same height, should follow the same height as the sidebar. Okay, so if we refresh this, see what happens. Okay, so if we inspect this element right here, we'll see that the there you go. So the sidebar will always have a maximum height according to the viewport, and content will follow the same height. Okay, so I think I get that part. Okay, so styling dropdowns, I don't need to mind that first. So as you can see, when I try to research something, I just really want the minimum ones, just the things that I need, and probably read the details from there. Okay, so now it's time to add the sidebar toggle button. So this button will handle the opening and closing of the sidebar. Okay, so it's just a button that allows us to toggle the sidebar. So maybe if we put that in our application here. Okay, ideally we'd have some sort of main menu here somewhere on top of the actual content that's rendered. We don't have for now, so I guess we can add just a simple button. Let's just call this toggle. And according to this one, okay, no data yet, just as an ID that will probably reference later on. So let's give this an ID and say maybe something like button toggle nav. Okay, give it some class, button info, see how that looks like. Okay, so you have the toggle right there. And maybe we can move to the JavaScript part. So I'm guessing if we remove or if we add, okay, go back to the CSS. So if we add active, we have margin left. Okay, so maybe I was wrong about this one. Because intuitively, if you add some active definition or some active class to your div, ideally it should be the one highlighted. So I'm thinking it should be the one that actually makes the thing appear. Apparently we have a margin left negative 250 pixels. So let's try to sort of experiment and see what this actually does. Okay, so going to nav, let's say we forcefully put in an active class. Let's see what happens with the there. So it's sort of okay, so I guess I was correct in thinking that if you add the active class to our div sidebar, then it will push it 250 pixels to the left, thus having the effect of it disappearing. Okay, but apparently that's not the case. If you say something is active, that's the time it will actually disappear. But without it, that's the time it will appear. Like so. Okay, which is weird. Okay, so maybe, okay, let's just go with that and change the terminologies later on once we get it working. Okay, so media query. So this one is to make the application responsive, so I won't deal with that yet now. Alright, so JavaScript part. Okay, so the idea here is to toggle active class to the sidebar and clicking the toggle button. Right, so by default the sidebar will appear, meaning it doesn't have the active class yet. So we want to have JavaScript to sort of remove and add the active class from the sidebar reference. Okay. Alright, so I sort of understand that part. Now the question is, where do we actually put it? In our layouts, we're sure that we always include the application.js tag, or the application.js file, which is our first JavaScript file and is common and is included in the layout, meaning all pages will have this. So it's only fitting to put the functionality there. Right, so I can say something like document.ready. Okay, so we'll reference first our toggle button. Sorry, that would be in here. Okay, so our button toggle nav. Okay, so let's just name it the same thing. Button toggle nav. Right, so there we go. Okay, so this thing references this button right here. Okay. Now every time we click that button, something happens, which in turn is to simply toggle the sidebar. Okay, so we need the sidebar reference. Okay, I always want to have my references cached in a separate variable, so I don't have to keep on referencing it once the JavaScript gets too long. So sidebar dot toggle class from jQuery active. Right, so let's see how this looks like. And the reason why it takes so long to load, notice, is that upon changing the some JavaScript file and reloading it, Rails will attempt to compile the JavaScript using Webpacker. Alright, so I guess the toggle thing's working without any animations. Okay, and I guess that's the sort of MVP for the sidebar menu. Okay, it's time to take a break and see. Okay, so my ship is done mining that asteroid. Let's try to target another thing. What was I mining back then? Okay, so I was mining condensed scordite. There's several in the system, so we approach another one. Okay. This really is a nice, beautiful game, especially for if you're like me who's into sci-fi. This one is definitely a something worth getting into. Plus it has a good API, so maybe I'll probably try to make some video content about how to integrate or how to code or integrate your application, or create an application that integrates with your EVE Online game. So just mine this asteroid. Okay, leave it mining and go back to coding. Right, so let's try to define another task. Actually, the main menu was all I needed at this point. Okay, so we have some sort of nice menu working right there. Right, now try to solve maybe a smaller task, like solving why this table won't go all the way until the width. Well, actually it does. table, right, goes the entire width for content, but the content ID itself is not maximizing the width of the current. It just sort of wraps around. The width is defined by the content that this div wraps around. So my task right now is to make sure that the width expands the entire width, the entire space right here. So maybe the tutorial actually said how to do it, but not sure how. Okay, I've tried to search for content, specifically hashtag content. As a result of using flexbox properties, page content will take the remaining width of dot wrapper. So as long as we don't use flex wrapper wrap property. Okay. But the wrapper's width is already at 100%. So we can verify here. Okay, so why won't it take 100%? That's odd. I believe there's a demo here. Let's try to take a look at what the there. I'll just minimize the screen. Right. Oh, okay. So yeah, wrapper takes in 100%. Content. Oh, so content has to have 100% width as well, with some nice padding right there. Alright, so let's try that out. Okay, so for content, the width of 100%. Hopefully it will work. Okay, there you go. Problem solved. Let's put some padding. So you have some nice breathing space. And I think the same we can go for sidebar. The same goes for sidebar. Let's put a padding of 20 pixels as well, so everything's laid out nice, so it won't sort of just be forced in the edge or something. Okay, and we have our nice clean interface. Check out the form, so the form's still working. Right, so that mini task is done. Let's go back to Eve Online. So asteroid's still mining. My sort of ore hold is at 5,000 meter cubic capacity. Right, so it'll take a while before it gets filled in. Alright, maybe a few more things. Since we're dealing with the side nav here, maybe it's time to style the main menu options and probably try to implement the collapsible thing, just like the one here in the demo. Right, so let's see how that looks like. Maybe we can copy the styles for the navigation first. Okay, so it has a class here for list unstyled components. Let's see now. Sometimes I get too lazy to look for the actual CSS tends to get really tedious to do, so it's not really my cup of tea. So I just tend to copy a lot of stuff. Okay, so in any case, okay, here we go. So for UL components, you have some sort of nice border here, as well as some padding. So let's try that out. For the UL in our sidebar, let's give it a class for components. Alright, so I have something like that. Okay, still toggling. Okay, actually, what we can do is we can copy these stuff. So for list unstyled, okay, it's just something simple. List style none. That's a class, right? So we say, where do we actually define it? Okay, so list unstyled. So we say sidebar ul list unstyled. We'll simply have list style none. Let's see how that looks like. Right. So just remove the bullet points with the actual font. Say for li. So li will also have display list item. Okay. Alright, so let's say sidebar ul li. Actually target this. Display list item kit match parent. Okay, so something like this. Specifically for the sidebar only. Alright. Nothing too interesting there. Okay, so right, so the submenu. Okay, so how do they do it here? Right. Okay, so let's say for our submenu, let's say for accounting entries, I'd like to have like a submenu that will, accounting entries doesn't really call to have some sort of submenu for it. Okay, except for probably new accounting entry. So maybe I'll have this entire thing as the actual submenu for a sort of larger parent. Okay, so let's call that. Okay, so another UL here. List unstyled. Okay. So this entire thing will be its own menu item here. Okay, similar to this one. Right, so just fix the end tags here. Okay, so let's name this something like operations. Oh no, this is a dummy heading. So for the within the li itself, you have a link. You have a link as well as the actual submenu given by the UL tag. Okay, so this one will be our sort of main categorical link, which we call, let's say, operations. Okay, let it link to nowhere. Okay, give it some data toggle, collapse, class equals dropdown toggle. Okay, so let's see what it looks like. Okay, so we have, okay, so the drop down toggle actually allowed us to have this nice arrow here, which we can use to show the user that this one has a sub menu. All right, just clean up the CSS part. Okay, I don't need the border bottom. Okay, so we have a cleaner user interface. Okay, so what does the toggle do? Okay, so how do we achieve this effect right here? Right, styling dropdowns. So A, data toggle collapse. Let's unify the links a bit, remove the triangle. Okay, additional styling. So where's the part that actually makes it up and down? Maybe this one? No, this is just for styling. Yeah, so here's a problem if I'm lazy enough to read everything. Just filling up content, structure. To make drop-down menu collapsible, data toggle collapse should be added to the link holding the drop-down. Right, which is what I did, but it won't collapse. Note that I also added class drop-down toggle. Okay, the link's href attribute must contain the ID of the drop-down menu preceded by the hash. Oh, okay, so the link should point to the UL with that particular ID. Okay, submenu, submenu. Okay. The drop-down menu itself should also have a collapse class too. Okay, so this is some bootstrap magic. Okay, so instead of saying components, let's have this as collapse and give this an ID. So let's say we say nav operations and we link that. So apparently it doesn't link to just anything. It has to link to the actual UL that will serve as our drop down or our submenu. So we say nav operations. Okay, so let's see if this works. Oh, okay, so there we go. In this case, it won't fold. So maybe I'm missing another thing. Area expanded equals false. I have data toggle collapse. So every time I click it, it will toggle collapse here. What if we don't have it initially? Nope. Okay, so it's not working. So I hope it would. Okay, so be sure to add the area expanded to the drop-down control element A. This attribute explicitly defines that the current state of the collapsible element to screen readers and similar assistive technologies. If the collapsible element is closed by default, it should have a value of aria expanded false. Okay, so that's why it's closed by default. If you set the collapsible element to be open by default using an in class, set aria expanded to true on the control instead. Clicking the anchor, the dropdown will slide or up or slide down according to the aria expanded value. I think I did everything right. Need to toggle collapse, class, dropdown toggle. I think this is what's missing. Nope. No, we already have that here. Okay. Let's have a bug there. Let's take a break and see what our mining's doing. Alright, so we mined out the asteroid, almost full. Let's see. Okay, we have one more massive scordite that we can mine before our ore hold is full, and hopefully we can sell it back to the market. Right, so let's see, where were we? Toggle's working, except for this one. We know that it's collapsible by default. Okay. Huh. Let's try to search that. Toggle, collapse, not collapsing, not closing, right? So let's see. Class collapse. Reverse not inherently close the menu. Now this is Bootstrap 3, so maybe say Bootstrap 4. Be more explicit. Four years later, and this did this for me. It's very common with. Why didn't it work by default? If I click collapse, do we need to have a collapse class? Maybe that's what I'm missing. This li. No, you need to have. We have a collapse class. Okay, so we want to close it by adding a collapsed class with the class of our link. Okay, so maybe we can do a bit of JavaScript here. Since it's not working by default and all else fails, manually do it via JavaScript. Okay, so it should work just like oh, but it should target just specifically for this UL. So why is it not adding the collapsed? Maybe I missed something. Let's try to inspect that. Okay, so by default, we simply just have this one, a link that doesn't show the submenu. Okay, so every time we click it, drop down toggle, area expanded true. Okay, let's try to make that work first. Okay, just missing something here. Okay, let's take it line per line. By default, if it's not showing a href, the div data toggle collapse, this one, class drop down toggle. Okay, drop down toggle collapsed. If it's not showing by default, and area expanded false. Oh, still not working. Collapse doesn't seem to disappear. Okay, that's weird. Alright, I did everything correctly, I think. Let's try to look for that again. Collapse list unstyled. Okay, and then we have an ID, link to the ID. Drop down toggle. Data toggle collapse. Seems about right. Why won't it collapse? It doesn't add the collapsed part. It was mentioned here briefly. Where should collapse be? Right, it should be a attribute of that's not working. Collapse, navbar collapse. Oh, okay, now I see it. No, it's correct spelling. Okay. At least it's working. Okay, maybe we'll try to solve this bug some other time. At least we got the side menu to work, right? Okay, now it's not working. Okay, that's weird. Right, so at least we got some interface working. We have a sidebar menu and a Okay, there we go. Now it's working. I wonder what happened. What did I add here? Seems to be working okay. Alright, so not sure what happened there. Okay, so that's okay. So what did I learn? Okay, one thing I learned is that I'm really lazy with CSS. And still a long way to go. It's really quite tedious to do design work in web applications. So I guess hats off to front-end developers who have the time and patience to actually design a particular web application. I know these types of people probably have their own, nitpicks when it comes to design. That's why I always fall back to an already built design which I can simply extend. But it's nice to know that at least now I can do some manual sidebar and customize it more to my liking. Right. Okay, so that's just it for this part. Before I end the video, okay, so it stopped mining. Okay, forgot to launch my drones. Okay, so this particular ship doesn't have any weapons in it. So if I get attacked and I'm coding, for example, then it has a risk of my ship being destroyed. So my ship has these things called drone, which I sometimes forget to launch when doing some mining work. Okay, but since I'm done mining, I can now go back to the space station and try to sell my loot or my stock. Let's talk to that space station. Let's admire the effects. Brought to you by Intel Integrated Graphics. Still looks pretty good considering I'm on a laptop. Take this game anywhere as long as there's internet. Okay, so I really like the effects of entering a space station. Bam, there we go. Nice space station sci-fi effects. It's a good game to, I guess, to play while lazing off and trying to work your CSS skills. Right. Oh, I like the animation here. Okay, there we go. And let's transfer our loot. Oh, so I was mining condensed cordite and massive cordite. These are two different things. I'll just put it in the item hanger. Sell it. Okay, let's see where I'm at in terms of ISK. Okay, so it did not hit 20 million ISK. But it's late and I'm sleepy, so let me just commit this code. Let's see. Added CSS and JavaScript for collapsible navigation. Let's push it. And okay, there we go. Right, so that's it for this video.